Hey, FCBC family. It is Thursday, which means it is time for empowering conversations that act, awaken the conscience today. With myself, Pastor Mike, and none other than the world famous
Heavy B.
Heavy B. Listen, family, as you join us on tonight, let us know where you are joining us from, what part of the world you are in when you get on. We see Ken is on the couch in Manhattan. God bless you in the couch ministry. And Sharon in the Bronx. But again, as always, thank you for being a part of tonight and joining us. We always want to make sure that these gatherings are informative and that we walk away here not just having a good time, but also learning and feeling empowered in particular. So if this is your first time with us, thank you for joining.
Thank you. Listen, the fact that you've chosen to spend your time with us tonight is so exciting. And before we begin, I have to put it out there because Pastor Mike is going to make fun of me if I don't. Because y'all know he's a jokester. We saw this like 2 weeks ago.
No, I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah. Okay.
Hold on. Watch this. Watch this as I take a sip. What does that cup say?
We first of all, I didn't get the memo about, where having cups or additional nalia. Where was
I needed some tea for my throat, and this was the only cup I could find.
The only cup you could find.
Yes. And I wanted to do it because it is Black History Month, and on Valentine's Day, this past Sunday, was Founders Day for Morehouse College. Isn't it a blessing?
Wow.
That Morehouse College was founded on a day of love, Valentine's Day. So Valentine's Day was, I have to read to you what somebody sent me. Now, I'm not saying I believe this. I just felt the need to share with you what was sent to me by someone wishing me happy Founders Day. Here's what it says. And so you know I'm reading it, so you don't think I'm making it up. Here it is.
Okay.
It says, and on the 14th day of February,
oh Lord,
God gave women the greatest gift of all, the Morehouse man. Happy Founders Day, brothers. Hashtag trending since 1867. Now, I'm not saying I believe that. I'm telling you what someone sent me, and I wanted to read it to say how this person expressed. And so now I'm not saying I would say that, right? But I'm just telling you what the person sent me. So shout out to my Morehouse brothers. Even though Founders Day was Sunday, we still thank God for Founders Day and the gift of Morehouse men. Look at God.
Look at God. You know what? I think you were the one that told me if you don't have anything nice to say, you just don't. Yeah. So
it don't matter because there's a saying, you can always tell a Morehouse man, but you can't tell him much. So you don't have to say nothing.
Wait, why are there so many rules to how we engage? I mean, listen, there shouldn't be this many rules, but we're nonetheless, congratulations. Happy Founders Day. We celebrate all of your successes, all of the Morehouse men who contributed to society. And we'll leave it at that.
All right, let's go. Take it away. Hot topics.
So this week's Hot Topics, and I just also have to say, you guys, I just got my new Invisalign. So if you hear a list and you're like, why does Pastor Heaven sound like that right now? I am relearning how to talk right now, essentially. And Pastor Mike just gave me right before we came on an advice on how to learn how to talk again. So hopefully by next week, I will have trained myself in this new form of speech. But for now and today, you may hear a list. So don't be alarmed.
I told her I have a list. And many years ago, when I went to was in speech class, they told me how to do it. I won't tell you the secret, but she'll be practicing tonight. So, all right, take it away, Heavy B.
Yes. So we are going to ready to talk about this week. We're going to kick it off. As many of you know, a great and brand new film just came out. And unfortunately, many of I need to be.
Go ahead.
Anyways, so this past weekend, a great film came out highlighting a phenomenal revolutionary, a phenomenal leader by the name of Fred Hampton in his movie Judas and the Black Messiah. And if you had a chance to watch it, now listen, the conversation that we are about to have, if you haven't watched the movie, We're not going to give away spoilers. Everything that we're going to talk about is going to be historical history. You can find this in any documentary. So we are not giving away anything. Don't start to freak out and say, oh my God, I don't know. Listen, anything we're going to talk about is historical. So
hold on, before you say anything,
mm-hmm.
Fred Hampton is a major part of Black history.
Yeah.
And I do realize there were some people who only learned about him in this movie.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say shame on you. Mm-hmm. But I'm going to say, as Heavy B said, he is part of history. You should know who Fred Hampton was and what he represented in many ways. So, continue.
Yes. So both Pastor Mike and I had a chance to watch the film, and we had lots of thoughts, and we thought it'd be a great opportunity for us to discuss it in conversation with in relationship to the conversation that we had last week regarding radicals and sort of revolutionaries and how do we reimagine activism in this time. So, Pastor Mike, I know you had a chance to watch the film. What were some of your initial thoughts as you were watching it? I know a lot of that information was stuff that you had already known, but what did you feel that what did you walk away feeling after you watched this movie?
You know, I think one of the things that we have to always remind ourselves when we look at this movie or think about it, and even in the midst of watching, I had to keep telling myself, this brother was 21 years old. And I keep saying that. And those who are around him were 19, 20, 21, right? And they were what we would call revolutionaries, right? Yeah. And the interesting thing about not just Chairman Fred, as he was known,
Chairman Fred, that's
it. But the Black Panthers was something I've said before, and that is that revolutionary acts look different. But for the Panther Party, revolutionary love led to revolutionary acts. And there was no greater manifestation of revolutionary love than to take care of your community.
Yeah.
All right. No, it's not on Netflix, it's on HBO Max. All right. But to take care of your community, that was revolutionary love. When you are among people who are constantly being bruised and battered by society and racism and systemic and institutional racism, then at the end of the day, how you take care of your community, how you take care of the vulnerable in your community is an act of revolution. It is revolutionary love at its best. You know, I listened to a sermon I had you listen to by Barbara Brown Taylor, and she said that for too long, we've allowed our beliefs to shape our actions.
Yeah.
So what does it look like when our experience, our actions shape our belief? Yeah. So that when you engage in these acts that are shaped by revolutionary love, you reimagine what revolution is. We think revolution was about walking around with black berets and black leather jackets and shotguns. That's not revolutionary. We have a right to bear arms in this country. So that's not revolutionary. What made him a threat were other pieces. And I'll let Heavy B talk about it, but I'll come back. But what was your take on it?
Yeah, I mean, you know, as someone that kind of had, you know, I knew who, you know, Chairman Fred was, and still watching that film was an opportunity to really understand sort of the power that Chairman Fred possessed, which was his ability, and you talk about this all the time, right? It's creating a transcendent narrative that allows for multiple groups to come together, multiple groups of people from all walks of life around one central common issue, right? Which was their human rights. At a basic level, that's what was being terrorized. Whether you were, you know, when he would say, you know, black power to black people, white power to white people, yellow power to yellow people, he was trying to create a transcendent narrative and trying to bring individuals together. Although they may have had ideological differences, very clear, he was still able to find a way. In particular, when there was a moment where he found himself at the white church, I think it was like, what was the church, right? Correct, Pastor Mike?
Yeah. They were meeting.
Yeah. And that was just like I think a much nicer, probably a much, you know, it wasn't as, I'm sure as probably the way that it really happened, right? I'm sure it was probably much more dramatic. I'm sure it's probably much more difficult, right? In a movie, in a film, you're creating it for Hollywood. But what I will say is that for a Hollywood film, I didn't feel like it was cheapened. I feel like they were really intentional about the way in which they were attempting to portray Chairman Fred as somebody who really saw that a revolution is not bound to a person. When he made the statement that You can't kill a revolution. You can kill a revolutionary, but you can't kill that was such a poignant statement. And I kept thinking about our current movements and movements, you know, whether it was the civil rights movement, when certain people passed away. Oh my God, you guys, I'm sorry, I have to stop. Pastor Mike.
Go ahead. I know what's going on. Yes. Heavy B will be right back. She has an issue. So here I am. But as she was saying, I think the reality is that revolutionary love manifests itself differently. And what the movie showed is, what does that look like? The Black Panthers made it clear, not just in Chicago, where Chairman Fred Hampton was, but in New York, where we have even Black Panthers in our congregation. How do you take care of the community? How do you love on the community? Feeding the children, feeding those who are hungry, offering free medical checkups, helping them understand the necessity around building wealth in the community. These were things the Black Panthers did. That was a revolutionary act. And then if you talk to Panthers toward the end of the movement, before it was kind of broken to pieces by COINTELPRO and FBI, they were trying to build united front. So what Fred Hampton was doing in Chicago, when you watch the movie, was being done in other places around the country by other Panther chapters. How do you transcend the barriers? And they were doing something in the movie, you'll see something. When he goes into this white space, where behind the main speaker in this white space, predominantly white space, was a Confederate flag. Confederate flag is in. We know what that Confederate flag means to many of us in that moment. But what he said is that, listen, at the end of the day, we may have deep division, but we're all both living in the slums. We're living in the ghetto. We're living in poverty. So let's not get sidetracked with these things that we think are different. Let's focus on what we have in common. And right now, whether you're Black, white, Latino, Native American, Asian, if you poor, you poor. And that was the key piece. It is creating narratives that are transcendent. It is a revolutionary act to try to turn antagonists into allies. I hope you catch that. That is a revolutionary act to turn antagonists into allies. And that's what Fred Hampton was doing at 21 years old. 21 years old. And you see why they had to assassinate him. Because if he has the charisma to attract people across racial lines, we're not talking about just liberal white people. We're talking about some extreme white people who were walking around with Confederate flags, found commonality behind the cause that Fred Hampton was bringing. Do you understand how powerful that is? Right? So then someone say, they keep attacking us when we start picking ourselves up. No, that ain't just when they start attacking us. They start really attacking us when we begin to transcend the lines that were created to divide us. Think about when Malcolm X is killed. Malcolm X is killed at a moment, whether how was instigated, killed at a moment when his vision, his narrative was broader than just Black people. When he went on his Hajj to Mecca and realized he saw blonde-haired, blue-eyed Muslims. He saw people that he used to call devil who are now worshiping with him as brothers and sisters. He began to broaden his perspective to a more humanistic approach. Think about when Dr. King is killed. Dr. King is assassinated at a moment where he is realizing the limitations of civil rights and was beginning to transcend into human rights. And when he attacked the war of Vietnam, he saw the moral inconsistency of fighting for Black civil rights here while there were Black men who were being sent to Vietnam to kill other people of color in that place. He said, I can't talk about civil rights and not condemn the war in Vietnam, right? So again, he broadens his perspective from sometimes the narrowness of civil rights, right, as shaped by Black oppression, and then he moves to human rights. And then, of course, Fred Hampton at 21, right? At 21, he's assassinated, murdered, because he was transcending the narrow confines of limited engagement and was building allies. When you speak to some Black Panthers, as I had, those who I know dearly, who I count friend and mentor, they will tell you we have to pick up the work from where the Panthers ended, which was building a united front based on class. The commonality for so many of us is poverty. There are poor places in Kentucky, poor places in in Appalachian Mountains, poor places in West Virginia, and poor places in New York State, where for some white people, the only badge of honor is to say you're white. They're not made to always see that sometimes, for example, supporting Trump was voting against your own interests as a poor person. Your whiteness did not protect you from poverty. So Fred Hampton is looking to build these bridges these divides along the language of class and poverty, so that we see we do have something in common. Yes, you're white and I'm black. Yes, you're Latino and I'm black. Yes, you're Native American and I'm black. And yes, you're, Asian and I'm black. But guess what? In the eyes of the powers that be, the structures, what drives this force is the economic divide. That's why Fred Hampton was killed. And they were moving towards building a united front. So if you call yourself a revolutionary right now in the vein of the Black Panther Party, but you can only organize among your own people, you're not a revolutionary in according to how the Black Panthers understood and were moving towards mobilizing when the Black Panther Party was destroyed and broken up, right? And that's what people don't realize, right? You, in order to transform this country in ways that are sustaining, we have to move beyond sometimes the narrowness of our movements and think about what does it mean to transcend these divisions, to build a united front in order to win our liberation. It's an ongoing struggle, but I think it becomes the key. So I think we've dealt with Judas and the Black Messiah.
I heard it all. Let me just say, from the backstage, I still could hear it on. I 100% agree with everything that you said, Pastor Mike. So
Heavy B ran to the church and came back. So now she's here.
Exactly what I did. Yeah. And I also low-key, don't tell my dentist took my Invisalign.
Oh, Lord.
I'm just annoyed.
I will not.
But, yeah. Don't tell him this.
Was one other thing I want to mention before we move on. And I said I was going to mention this. We're still on hot topics. We're going to wrap this up and go into our main conversation in a minute. But today, according to science, is a monumental day.
Yes.
The Mars rover, the second one, Perseverance, landed on Mars this afternoon. Many of us may have seen the alerts on news or on the television. They had it broadcast with some new images of Mars from the rover, right? Now, let me put this in perspective. This rover launched from the United States in July of 2020, in the midst of the pandemic, July. And on today, in February 2021, it arrived to Mars, 293 million miles away. I want you to conceive of that.
It's crazy.
293 million miles away. And the rocket upon which the rover was on was moving at a pace of 12,000 miles per hour. So you now understand how long it took to get there from July of 2020 to February of 2021, 293 million miles away, 12,000 miles per hour. And Perseverance landed on Mars today. Now, we have the ingenuity and the innovation and the technological savvy to figure out how to propel a rocket and this rover 293 million miles away at a speed of 12,000 miles per hour. We have that kind of ingenuity. But when Perseverance landed on Mars today, there wasn't enough perseverance in the state of Texas, where NASA is housed, by the way, to make sure that people, including some of my in-laws, could have electricity today. Could have food today. Clean water today. So what this tells you is that we have the ingenuity to solve major world problems. The question is not ingenuity, it is will to do. The social, cultural, and political will to do these things. And this lets you know it's not about grids that were offline. It's about a commitment to the well-being of people. What does it profit humanity to send a rocket 293 million miles away and forget this? I was hungry and you fed me not. I was naked and you did not clothe me. Thirsty and you gave me no drink. In a hospital and prison and refused to visit me, a stranger, and you did not welcome me. We have the technology to solve all of the great world problems. We were able to develop vaccines in record time to save the globe from being destroyed by a virus. We could not make sure that people in some of the poorest parts of Texas did not have their electricity, did not have drinkable water, did not have access to gas. So today, as I watched that on TV and I saw people celebrating this great accomplishment, while at the same time incapable to make sure people had heat in the winter and food that did not go bad because electricity was out. We can't celebrate that. We have to be mindful of that. And I think that is why we are called, and I say we, I don't mean just me and Pastor Heaven. I mean those of us who follow the teachings of the carpenter. At every moment, you have to be able to hold culture, society accountable for the reckless insanity that we see played out. We even see, this ain't the first time this is happening in Texas. This happened before. Going to the moon, right? Going to Mars. In the midst of that capability, still people are hungry. Still children will be hungry tonight. Still families will be homeless. Still people can't get a job paying a livable wage. And yet, $2.5 billion spent to send an inanimate object 293 million miles away. That's the world we live in. This is the country we live in today. So if you want a hot topic, think about the carelessness exhibited by this country. Celebrate the accomplishment, yes. But my God, if an inanimate object can be propelled 293 million miles, you mean we cannot build the infrastructure? Yes, and in Puerto Rico, we can't guarantee basic necessities for people to live with? No. It's not ability, it's will. It's will. And we all, in our comfort tonight, in our celebration, remember Jesus' haunting words, in as much as you've done it to the least of these, you've done it also unto me. So that's my axe to grind tonight. That's my soapbox. I'm gone.
Well, it was a great soapbox. I think you're bringing up a very good point, and I've seen a lot of people mention that. You know, the way in which America has not really been prepared, or the willingness to be prepared to deal with a lot of our social issues, but knows how to go to war and knows how to do other things that are not necessarily beneficial to, like you mentioned, the least of these. And so we really have to, as a country, reconcile with that. And, you know, like Fred Hampton said, we have to create a revolution. We have to empower the people so that the people can speak up. That's right. Because to your point, Pastor Mike, it's not going to just be you and I. You know, you and I can't go out there and, you know, and start a revolution. We can be revolutionaries, right? But in regards to starting a revolution, it's about power to the people. And so, you know, as the words that you're implanting, they need to be implanted in everyone's souls so that we all can rise up together and actively speak out about, you know, against the institutions that are, you know, pushing poverty down and continuing to disregard so many of our social issues. So
let me say this, Heavy B. We can't, I'm going to push back. I'm not going to push back now on this. We can't start a revolution. Not this Sunday coming, but next Sunday. I'm going to talk about how revolution gets started. So we can, and we are.
I mean, for sure. I think, you know, us as individuals, but I mean it more so that you need people behind you to really kind of push and keep a revolution going. That was what Fred's hope.
Absolutely.
And I'll say this as the last thing, so I didn't get a chance. It did make me very proud to be somebody that was a member of FCBC and someone that works at FCBC, because to see what the Black Panthers were doing and to see it and to see that everything that they were doing is being emulated at FCBC. Our model of whether it's breakfast for books, the pantry, every moment of our engagement first is not about conversion. It's not about trying to get people to do something. It's about how do we serve? And once you serve people, when you give them food, when you give them something to eat, when you feed their bodies, then there's a willingness to engage their soul, you know, and engage them in that capacity. And when I say soul, I don't mean in conversion capacity. I mean more so, we clarify that. But just more so being able to just, you know, people, there's so many people who started to come to FCBC because they went to our pantry.
Yeah.
And that's why I say that there's different ways that churches can create moments of engagement that is not, you know, really kind of focused in on a Sunday. And I think that's what, you know, when I see FCBC, our moments of engagement are first in serving the community. So
Hold on, before you move, I want this person, Taniqua, I hope I'm spelling it right, said, I agree with you, Pastor Evan, but what do we do when a lot of our people that will not step up? Here's what, you can't worry about who doesn't step up.
Yeah.
Right? You have to do it. And let your revolutionary acts connected to your revolutionary love become infectious with those who are around you, right?
Yeah.
But let me just tell you this. I'm giving away, not this Sunday, but next Sunday's text. I'm giving away the scripture, right? When Jesus was crucified, right? According to the scriptures, had ascended. The disciples started the work, all right? Not perfect, made mistakes, but I want you to hear what they said about this kind of motley crew of people, right? The religious leaders, when they saw them continuing the work, they said, these people have turned the world upside down. From this little hamlet, right, in Nazareth called Galilee, turned the world upside down.
Yeah.
You don't need 100 people. As Fred Hampton showed, you need people who are convicted and committed.
Yeah.
And if we saw a virus be global, then revolutionary acts based on revolutionary love can be just as infectious, just as contagious, and can spread globally the same way. I'm convicted of that. I believe that. Okay, enough. I'm done.
No. All right. So we're going to go on to our next topic. And before we get to there, we want to continue reminding folks, if you have not gotten the vaccination yet and you are eligible to get the vaccine here in New York City, please make sure that you are getting the vaccination. I know that the appointments have been a little bit difficult. And so in the coming weeks, we'll be sharing about a partnership that FCBC will be doing with New York Presbyterian, along with Harlem Hospital, to help get our seniors vaccinated. And so please be on the lookout for that. But for, like I said, mention again, please, we'll be having more conversations around the vaccination as new research comes out over the coming weeks. That wasn't the only one. But we know Pastor Mike is, they mentioned this week that, Joe Biden said that by July, there'll be vaccines for everybody, hopefully. But the biggest issue is around making sure that our folks will be taking it. So
but with that said, if people miss the conversation about speaking truth, the African-American community vaccine, you can go back to our YouTube channel and you can watch it. If you have any questions, I don't want us to get sidetracked, but if you have any questions about the vaccine, we had Ebony Carrington, who's the CEO of Harlem Hospital, on there, and Dr. Ide Brown, a surgeon who was talking about the vaccine. So you can go back on my YouTube channel and watch that conversation. If you have any questions, I'm sure that conversation with myself, Ebony Carrington, and Dr. Ide Brown can answer all the questions, honestly. So, yeah. All right.
So just want to make sure we add that in there. But our next and our main topic for the evening is centered around an important conversation. And it's centered around a very important documentary that premiered this week, which was on the Black church. It was on PBS. And it's also on YouTube right now. So if you do not have PBS or you don't have cable, you can go to PBS right now and watch it. And so full disclosure, I didn't have a chance because I don't have PBS. I had a chance to watch some of it. But Pastor Mike definitely had a chance to watch both. But what we're going to do is really engage in sort of a general conversation, kind of streaming from the movie, from the documentary around the importance of the Black church. We've had conversations. I know, Pastor Mike, you've been having a lot of interviews from different entities around the importance of the Black church. And so I want to definitely get some of your sort of raw, initial sort of kind of, just thoughts and feedback on the documentary,
Hold on, Pastor. Somebody put down there, because you said you don't have PBS. If you got any TV, they said PBS channel 13, just in case you're confused about which channel.
No, so I have a smart TV, so that doesn't, smart TVs don't have.
Well, ain't that smart then?
Yeah, right here. And maybe they do, I don't know, but I've only have apps. So
right.
Anyways, and if you did watch the movie, or if you did watch the documentary, make sure to put that in the chat. Put your thoughts on what you thought about the film, what you liked about it, what you liked about the documentary, what you thought was missing from the documentary. But I definitely want to make sure we engage in that conversation. So Pastor Mike, what did you like? What did you enjoy about the documentary? And then also, what did you feel like might have been missing in the narrative and in sort of the overall conversation on the documentary? And the last question I want to ask you, and I'll definitely answer as well. I had a chance to be a part of a Clubhouse conversation. I know that you had a chance to listen to it. And one of the panelists Dr. Kimberly Rousseau had asked a question about who was the audience for this documentary. And I think that kind of helps to really answer a lot of the questions around what was placed in the documentary and potentially what might have been missing from the documentary based on the audience. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts as, you know, someone who had seen part 1 and part 2.
Yeah, I was sent a screening a couple of weeks ago of the documentary. So here's what I will say. For anyone who doesn't know much about the history of the quote unquote Black church,
right?
Part 1 did a good job of just, if you had no knowledge at all, right? If you didn't know. Part 2 was a little rushed. I was disappointed because many other of Skip Gates' documentaries have been longer. Now, he begins this documentary by saying that, you know, this may be the most important one to the African American community, but then you kind of hasten through it in these 2 nights. And because you hasten through it, says something to me about how critical it really was. I've seen other of his documentaries last 2, 3, 4 parts.
Yeah.
In length. And I think that it was too short. By the time you got to part 2, too rushed.
Yeah.
But again, if you didn't understand the origins, the shaping of the African American religious experience in America, I thought it helped give some foundation, especially part 1 again, which I think was the part they spent more time in editing than they did the second part. So I thought that was cool. But then when you talk about the audience, which I know that the documentary was critiqued for, because those who are knowledgeable about some of this history question whether this was made for a white audience, which was a legitimate question.
Yeah.
To help them understand the Black church. Now, that is a fair critique, but the truth is there are many in the Black church who outside of showing up on Sunday don't know the history of the formation of what we call the Black church. You understand? So I think it was good in that regard. It was not so good in kind of how it was rushed through. I didn't like that part of it. I think they could have done a little bit more in-depth engagement. It was very superficial to me, very shallow in terms of the engagement and the way it dealt with it. It was like, a surveyor's course, like correspondence course on the Black church, real quick. Now, but granted, you couldn't cover it all in 2 nights, but I just thought they could have done a better job plotting out the trajectory of the documentary from beginning to end. When you got to the last 45 minutes, an hour, it was just.
And you mean that more so for the second part of the documentary, correct?
Second part, yeah. Part 1 I thought was good. Part 2 I just thought was rushed. Overall, there are many people who think it's good because, again, if you have no knowledge of this history, you don't know about it. You don't know where the Black free church movement started. You don't know how it originated. I think it was good, but I do think they glossed over a little bit. They did more celebrating than giving substance to the conversation. And other than, talking about the civil rights movement and kind of the abolitionist movement and the rebellion against slavery and white supremacy, I think as Christina just said, they didn't really push us in this century. They ended up highlighting the Black Lives Matter movement, which is actually a movement that is one of the first major quote unquote Black movements that is kind of decentered from church.
Right.
So they didn't really go in depth as to why that was the case.
Right.
Or what are the reasons this is happening, other than saying, the church is losing ground, the church is not appealing to young people. Well, it's the why, which I wish would have been dealt with a little bit more so people understand why this happened. So I'll pause there. I'm sure we'll have some other things. What are your thoughts on the part you saw?
Yeah, so, I only got to see part 1, and I think to your point, it was a great, Sharon Edwards just say part 2 didn't hold my attention like the first part. And I think, and there were a lot of folks that I heard sort of that critique, especially their focus around, Jake's and, the Potter's House, and very much these kind of like very celebrity-like churches and celebrity-like figures that are part of the Black church that, to be honest, are not, to me, emblematic of the truest form of the Black church, right? I kept thinking of like church mothers throughout the film, and just there's certain people that the congregation, the members, the people, the lay people really kind of make up, the heart and the soul of the Black church. And so when I had the chance to watch the first part of the documentary, I thought they laid out a great groundwork for the history. I think I was more intrigued, and I was recalling some of the things that I learned when I was in seminary regarding sort of the power around and when it comes to the colonization around Christianity. So as somebody from the continent, my family, in Eritrea and Ethiopia, we'd already had Christianity. So when the missionaries tried to come, they were pretty much pushed away because we had already adopted a form of Christianity. Their way in of trying to get people to be converted was this idea that you were a heathen because you didn't know who God was. You didn't know, Jesus. You didn't know these things. And so when they came to our land and they found out that we knew this person, they needed to find another way to engage us, to diminish and to find a way to come and to take over. And it was a strip us of our culture. And so I kept thinking about that as watching the film, in the ways in which slave masters were stripping them of their African culture. And thinking about that and thinking about just the ways in which how Christianity was a vehicle for that, the language that was used, but also knowing that the thing that was used to oppress them also was the thing that empowered them.
Yeah.
And thinking about what does that mean with the language that is used to oppress you is also now the narrative that you're using to create your own sense of, and I'm sure that freedom was longing in their spirit, but now they had a different sense of language as they're being converted. And in the film, they were talking about the way that, before was that because they were considered heathens, but once they started to know the Christian faith, there was a sense of danger around them becoming, a sense of rebellion. And I just kept thinking about that. That was something I just was stuck on, and just trying to understand the role of Christianity and the way that it continued to suppress and has suppressed, Black people in this country. But it also was the way in which the formation of the Black church sort of came about. So those are some things that I was thinking about. And I'm curious to know, Pastor Mike, we always talk about language and the importance of language and the way in which it can empower people. So I want to know if that was something that you had seen or, if that resonated with you in the film as well.
Well, here's the thing. So many people have this statement, people who are anti-Christianity, different movements have been anti-Christianity, or chastise or castigate Black people for being Christian. They say, you worship this white Jesus or worshiping this white man's religion. Now, a few things. One, this faith is not controlled by any one racial demographic.
Right.
Christianity is not a white man's religion, right? If you watch that part one of the documentary, what I did appreciate was being clear prior to the arrival, right, of those who were coming to bring slaves back to the United States, Catholicism,
right? They knew God.
Christianity,
right?
Islam, as long as certain indigenous practices and faith were already in existence.
Right.
The oldest quote unquote Christian movements were birthed in Africa.
Right.
Prior to, the 1600s.
Right.
And then coming to bring Africans as enslaved people to the Americas, this existed. So when I hear people say, oh, white man's religion, so what was it called when it was in Africa? Right? So because a faith is co-opted for political power dynamics doesn't mean they have control of the entire narrative. So I hear people say, oh, you believe some white Jesus. Well, no, Jesus wasn't no white man. And I don't care what picture those in power put up of Jesus. When you know your history, you know how to dismiss these things that are given to you. But it was beautiful to see them deal with that, because I think for some who watched it, there are many people among our community who think that we were introduced to Christianity when we got here.
Yeah.
Which is not true.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. The language of, God talk was already in us.
Already in Africa.
Yeah.
In many ways. From again, indigenous religious practices.
Right.
That if you saw, one of the things I thought was beautiful was how in many indigenous religious practices on the continent, sometimes those practices were a combination of different faith traditions.
Right.
It wasn't that they said, think about this, oh, you're going to hell if you're Muslim. No, in their practice, they incorporated Islam, they incorporated Christianity, they incorporated Catholicism.
Right.
Powerful came out, right? So this whole very rigid, very strict thing of you believe this way, that is very Western and very European. Right. That is not very African in terms of how we appropriate religion. One very important testimony of that was a scene at First African Baptist Church in Savannah, Georgia, a church that I've preached at quite a few times. One of our former members who moved, Lauren Tillman, father was the pastor. He was in the documentary. And we actually, for the men's retreat 2 years ago, went to Savannah to that church. Yeah. And one of the things that in the balcony of the church, where a lot of the original pews still existed, they pointed out that there were on the side of some pews, think about this, in a Black Baptist church, built and created, built by slaves who instead of buying their freedom, built a church that in this Black Baptist church, there were scrawlings on the pews in Arabic. Now, I want you to check that for a second.
Yeah.
We know that enslaved people here didn't learn Arabic from the oppressors. So that means that by the time you get to the construction of this church, that Arabic had been passed down through the slaves, right? And it was part of who they were.
Yeah.
Like in Sapelo Island, you had one of the largest Muslim enclaves in the midst of slavery.
Yeah.
So they didn't, watch this, they didn't learn about Islam from the slave masters. They brought that with them. And here's the part. They did not see any inconsistency between building a Baptist church and writing Arabic religious statements on the pews. Still there to this day, you can see it, right? So we have to stop. So this idea of it's our way or no way is not unique to our people. That is not who we are. We were taught that.
Right.
By what you call colonized Christianity, Constantinian Christianity.
Yeah.
Not how we honor God. They could not understand, just like Native Americans in this land, they thought that Native Americans were worshiping the buffalo or worshiping the tree or worshiping the river. No, they saw everything as an extension of God's creativity. To honor the buffalo was to honor God. To honor the tree was to honor God. To honor the river was to honor God. There was no place where God was not present.
Right.
So God was not present. And that's how we felt. This distinction and that conflict between sacred and secular, for us, there was no distinction. Everything was sacred. Because when you view everything as sacred, you treat certain things differently.
Wow.
I'm sorry.
No, that was great. That was great. You know, sometimes I have to remind myself that I'm a part of this show when I'm like, wait, I can't sit back. I'm listening. No, I agree. And I think everything that you're saying, that this is not, it's a constant reminder for, for so many of us, myself as someone that's from the continent, I'm aware that Christianity was not something that was brought, by the white man, but it was something that we had. It was innately a part of us. And even prior to, there were Black theologians, there were, I'm literally forgetting this guy's name. And I wish I remember my church Christian. He was I'm gonna have to find him.
What did he teach? What did he go?
No, he wasn't a theologian. I mean, he was like in the early church helped to start. He was one of the, I guess you call him a theologian, but one of the early church leaders.
Julian, Augustine.
It might have been
Augustine and Julian are considered early church fathers. They were of African descent.
Yes, that's what. Yeah.
People don't realize that. We talk about Augustine, Saint Augustine.
Yes,
These were the early church fathers, especially Saint Augustine.
Right.
These were Africans. See, and if you get hoodwinked by this stuff and start thinking, oh, these are white people. No, Augustine, these were Africans.
Yes.
So the early church fathers some of the early church fathers in Christianity were people of color, right? And we cannot forget it. The oldest Christian gatherings in the world, and you should know where you're from, the Coptic Church.
Coptic Church. All
right. If you don't know, our business manager at FCBC is from Egypt. He is a Coptic Christian. Okay? He's from Egypt. So I think that we have fallen victim to these narratives that are steeped in falsehoods and haven't done the work ourselves to understand, right, where this thing comes from. So,
and I think that, I just want to share briefly about sort of kind of, my history of, I didn't grow up in what you would call the traditional Black church. I grew up in an Eritrean church here in the United States, and it was a Pentecostal Eritrean church. And what was so interesting, I've since, really kind of had to really deconstruct my theology and decolonize my mind, because what I realized was happening to folks who were coming here, who were leaving sort of the Orthodox tradition, the Coptic tradition from my particular background, was that they were telling them that every part of our culture was demonic. So there were so many things growing up, Pastor Mike, that my parents to this day, I love them, consider demonic. That are just cultural, like dances, like literally things that are so innocent, that are just uniquely a part of our culture. Because how do you tell Christians who already have a Christian identity that you're wrong? So you have to remind them that your culture is demonic. So you have to shift your culture in order to really truly become Christian. You have to disengage from your identity. And that's exactly what happened here. And so to see that, it happened here, and it also happened on the continent.
Absolutely.
It was destructive, and it continues to be destructive. And I think, I didn't have a chance to watch part 2, but a lot of the critiques that I heard were sort of the focus, around this idea of the pervasiveness of the evangelical sort of identity within the Black church. There's so many evangelical Black faces right now. And you know what? I'm going to call it out like I see it. Yeah. Bishop T.D. Jakes is a representative of sort of that movement. He, and then you want to call out the other folks, the Mike, there are so
here's reality. Most Black, we don't realize this. Many African-American Christians today fall under the idea of Christianity as shaped by white evangelicalism.
Yes.
We don't realize that. We're not always cognizant of it, but it is not the way we appropriated. The way we appropriated Christianity in slavery, not the way we manifest it today. Right. Today, we do a better job we very generally speaking, we do a better job well, let me back up. In the documentary, you saw a big fracturing take place between those religious people who were honoring the cultural expressions of our faith, right, versus those who were trying to out white Christians. All right, that's the only way I can put it.
Yes, yeah.
They were trying to out white Christians by showing we can worship with dignity and poise. We can sing high anthems and hymns. And there was this schism between those who manifested their faith based on their cultural experience and those who were trying to, show what we can do with the pipe organs and the high liturgy and all of that stuff. When you had those people who and they make distinction between the North and South, who come from those, brush harbor experiences. That was what was handed down. The hymn lining, right? It wasn't as sophisticated as some would have wanted, but it was about religious expression and experience.
And it happened wherever Black people were.
Yeah.
It wasn't regulated. It wasn't relegated to a building. It wasn't put. And I think that was the power as they were talking. I remember writing that down was that as long as there was a congregation, that there was music, that there was noise, whatever might have been happening, that was the moment where the Black church has been forming. And it made me think about even now, right? We're in this pandemic. We can't be in a building. The Black church genuinely and truly is wherever, wherever we are as people. We carry that tradition. We embody that spirit. And so I think it's a constant reminder that, yes, I understand that, we were talking about sort of the trajectory of where the Black church is going. And I actually want to hear your thoughts about that, because I think that was what the second attempt of the part 2 was trying to do, right? Was to try to create a narrative of where the Black church is going. And so I want to see if you felt like that they capture that. Do you feel like they captured that narrative, or get a vision of this identity of where the Black church is going, and also what the Black church needs to be doing, right? If we didn't, discuss it, what are the gap areas that the Black church needs to be doing to create, to ensure that the livelihood and the tradition, and also that it evolves? Because one thing I do want to say, it is important to maintain tradition, but you also as we're talking about FCBC, you have to evolve.
Yeah.
You have to create a sense of evolution while also maintaining that tradition.
Well, two things. I saw consensus. I wish they would have covered the political power of the Black church. Honestly, they did. When you get to the part of the documentary when they say that during the Reconstruction, the majority of elected officials were pastors and ministers. You see, when you talk about political power, we don't need to dichotomize that between spiritual power and political power, because for Black folk in the early expressions of the African-American religious experience, there was no dichotomy. To be a person of faith meant to be deeply involved in one's political and social culture. There was no dichotomy being made at that moment, right? If I had done this myself, if I had done this documentary, who knows?
Okay, let's.
I could have spent 2 hours on one aspect. And if they would have done this one aspect right, or an hour, let's be realistic, an hour, the rest of it would have made sense. Or any other thing that came out. What I mean? The unlearned ingenuity of enslaved people. The idea that they could be told that somehow being a Christian, a good one, meant to be obedient to the master. It meant being docile. It meant staying in your place, right? To be able to hear that regularly. And then at night, when the master was asleep, to then steal time, as it were, or to steal away and go down by the river, in the brush harbor, in the trees, in the woods, and chant softly. But to hear all of that theology, negative, dehumanizing theology, and to then find a way to pick out the parts that spoke to their liberation, right? And then sing. And then watch this. These unlearned, untrained, right, organic theologians took the hypocrisy of what was being told by the slave master, the plantation preacher. And you know what they said when they got down by the brush harbor? Everybody talking about heaven ain't going. You see that? They were able to transform what they heard and then find that there was a friend in the lowly Jesus, right? They understood, they organically understood with their untrained selves that something was wrong with what they were being told. It didn't add up because where they messed up was that they were able to let a few learn how to read that book.
Exactly. They literally would take the book away and say, this book is putting bad things into your head.
Oh yeah. So if they would have spent time breaking down what the slaves did theologically, right? To able to translate insanity into something that would catapult acts of freedom. That right there could have been the whole platform. That would have helped people understand African-American religious expression and experience was birthed in rebellion to oppressive structures and a reimagining of what was presented in colonizing Constantinian Christianity, and was able to pick out the parts that made sense. And where did it make sense? It made sense when they talked about Moses going to Pharaoh. It made sense when they talked about Jesus being a brother in struggle and in pain. All that they could relate to. They picked out the parts that were necessary for their liberation, right? And were able to move forward. Now, watch this. If they had fixated on that aspect, to not be purveyors of the insane theology, but to chop it down, deconstruct it, reimagine it as liberating tools so that they could live, right? Then you could have used that to a platform to social justice. Doing what? Reimagining struggles for freedom. Then if you understand that, you would understand that we've never carried the water for oppressive theological regimes. We've always sought to transcend the narrow confines of white supremacist infused theology. And if we understood that, We wouldn't have been sitting around the black church talking about women ain't called to preach like the oppressor. We wouldn't have been sitting around talking about women can't lead like the oppressor. We wouldn't be sitting here today talking about LGBTQ people not welcome, because we would have understood the enormous inclusive arc of God's morally constructed universe. And that moral construction is not on rules and rituals and ceremonies. It is constructed in revolutionary love and revolutionary acts. Okay.
All right. So with that, we
to open.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. We're gonna sit an extra 10. I want you to just go ahead and rip it, because I'm just gonna sit.
No. I think what you said is a great way for us to get into our next.
I'm ready to go. Don't do it yet. Don't do it yet. I'm not ready. I gotta prepare my mind. I'm still, my heart beating fast.
Your heart's beating fast. Okay, so one of the things I will say, so to help calm us down, because I think what you're sharing and what you're saying, you're talking about the ingenuity and the creativity. And I think the word that I stuck on, we were talking about untrained theologians, right? That's what they were.
Yeah.
To have to create a narrative or to create that. I mean, that's essentially what theology is, right? Theology is trying to make meaning and make sense of life and God, and how does that all connect together? And that's exactly what they did. They created a theology for themselves, and it created a theology that birthed the Black church. And so I think everything that you're saying in regards to, I think if they would have focused on that, it would have definitely carried the film in a different direction. And it also probably would have lent more highlighting the contributions of probably Black women in that film. I know that there was critiques around that part, and their contributions, particularly as it comes sort of to the womanist movement, following the Black.
They just glossed over it.
Right, they just sort of glossed over. And so if you focus on that part, the ingenuity, then to your point, then you have to find a way to talk about all the ways in which, Black people have been able to birth creative movements in this space. And so that was definitely an opportunity missed. And so, but to your point, we already know who the audience was. And so,
but again, here's the reality. And I was on NPR this past weekend, and talking about, the Black church and the LGBTQ community. And what we have to do to be progressive in the future is understand that and be honest. And they dealt with it a little bit in the documentary, the historic blind spots of the church.
Yeah.
It was the oppression of women within the Black church.
I mean, also internalized oppression. Let's also talk about that. There was an internalized sense, and still, right, within church spaces, and particularly for Black women, there is an internalized sense of oppression that we have held on to. Yeah,
because when you repeat the mechanisms, see what people. Let me get churchy for biblical. The reason why when God delivers, one of the reasons God delivers is when God delivers Israel from Egypt, He has to give instruction on how to treat one another.
Yeah.
Think about this. And people, these 10 commandments, no. He had, according to scripture, we had to give instruction on how to treat one another, because if left to themselves, all they knew were the ways of the oppressor.
Yeah.
They would have created a new Egypt in Canaan. Think about it. When they're out of Egypt and Moses goes to spend time with God, when he leaves, what do? They start building gods from Egypt, golden calves. So what the direction God gives is not so much about what it means to be Jews, it's how to treat one another, because the best way to honor God is how we treat one another. So when you get to that point, that becomes critical. When you get to Jesus, Jesus is not talking about how to be a great Jew. He's talking about how to be a human being who knows how to treat another human being with dignity, right?
Yeah.
We understand those stories and those narratives. As you said, we would not get caught up in remaking structures that are based on, I love it, internalized oppression. Yeah. So here we go, fighting for liberation for the masses in the Black church, and then looking at Black women and saying, oh, by the way, you're not called to lead. By the way, God doesn't call women to preach, right? What is that doing? That's mimicking the oppressive ways that ground us. And then in modern times, right, from bad theological reading, now what do? We still tell to this day, it still manifests itself. The LGBTQ community, oh, God doesn't care about you. God doesn't love you because of who you are. And at the same time, talk about there's no hierarchy of different. I mean, those are our blind spots. And it was said in the documentary, I said it this week on NPR, that if we want to have a future, as the quote unquote Black church, we have to begin to understand that part of our futuring is not about creating anything new, it's reimagining our theology and also understanding that the way to the future is to be more inclusive and tolerant and not be rigid and intolerant like colonized and Constantinian Christianity taught us to be.
Yeah. Well, I also want to add one thing before we move on to our next segment, of course, which is what you're reading. One of the things I thought was so powerful reminded me when I was in seminary, we learned in my church history class about a law that was passed. And, at FCBC, we take baptism as one of the highest forms of, of a way for a person to sort of engage in, their relationship and furthering their relationship with God. And so to kind of see the power of baptism and the power that baptism had on the slaves, there was a law that was created, an act that was created in the Virginia colonies in 1667 that said that if you got baptized, because slaves were getting baptized, and then from that point, the language of baptism was talking about freedom, right? It's a liberative experience. Mm-hmm. And so there were slaves that were starting to become free. And so they created this act to say that even if you got baptized, you could get baptized, but that your baptism does not allow for you to become free. You understand the insanity that you could get baptized, but that created a law, an act in the Virginia colonies that literally said to slaves that if you get baptized, they felt you cannot become free, because what they were realizing was that this language of baptism, the power of baptism, was transforming them. It was liberating them. It was a liberative experience. And so once you embody that moment and you're changed forever, how can you go back? You have new eyes that you see. Yeah. You talk differently. You see differently. And they felt it was important to create a law to push back to ensure that they were oppressed even in their baptismal experience.
Yeah.
And so it ought to remind you, as we talk about, when we see, how we've changed the baptism experience at FCBC with the drums and it reminds you that this experience is really a sacred moment, and it truly does honor your ancestors, because you have the opportunity to go down in the water and truly come out free. Mm-hmm.
Like for the slave masters, free with an asterisk next to it.
Right, free with an asterisk. Because before they were just heathens, right? They were untrained heathen, unreligious. They didn't know God. But now that they started knowing God, they were afraid that they were going to begin rebelling. So even the slave masters understood the power, right? The power of the text, the power of the words, the power of this faith. Mm-hmm. An understanding of the transformation, but they felt that it was important to subject and to oppress people, even in these beautiful religious experiences like baptism. Mm-hmm. So every time you go, listen, for those of you guys, as we give, I'm not going to, put it out there, but we will be, starting baptism soon. And so for those of you guys that have not gotten baptized yet and are seeking to get baptized, I hope this encourages you even more to want to get baptized.
We can put it out there. We'll be doing baptisms again in April. So you'll see the announcements in case people who because I've got tons of, because COVID makes somebody want to go underneath the water.
Take me down.
COVID will make you want to get baptized. I know a lot of people reached out to me, so we're coming back in April. But you make a great point. They had to theologically contort the faith in order to maintain slavery, right? So I think that what is beautiful about FCBC and our language is this notion of, the carpenter.
Yeah.
And they didn't maybe use the language, but it was the carpenter that resonated. It was Jesus that resonated, not the Christ or the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. It was Jesus, the carpenter, that resonated. And I'll say this, to this day, we see the distinction, and I've often referred to this book, Jacqueline Grant, white woman's Christ, black woman's Jesus.
Yeah.
A big distinction, right? And this idea that the Christ meant something. The Christ was connected to status, position, power, and imperialism. Couldn't do that with the carpenter.
You can't.
You can't make the carpenter representative of Constantinian Christianity or imperialized Christianity, right? So that language that we use at FCBC, the carpenter, is for a reason. And I've said it tons of times, that language of the carpenter is an assault.
Yeah.
The commodification and imperialization that took place in the early Jesus movement. So,
and it's still taking place now.
Still taking place. and many, as you alluded to earlier, many African-American religious leaders are manifesting, still operating in, still teaching in that spirit of white evangelical, white supremacist infused theology of separating who's in and who's out, not realizing that for a lot of them folk, you'll never be in because of your skin color.
And then also, to your point, as we know, when we saw that the Black church was not just this place, it was this place of sort of this ministerial sort of, way for people to form their theology, but it was a political space. It was a space for rebellion. And so when you think about a lot of these Black church leaders who are operating in this sort of evangelical identity, when they constantly will say things like, well, it's not my place to speak on politics. And you want to consider yourself a Black preacher, a Black pastor, and leading a Black church, and you don't understand the identity and the roots of where the Black church started?
They don't. That's the problem. They don't. They only think the Black church existed the day when they were saved. They have no desire to learn the history, no desire to understand the theological formation, no desire to understand that what you're teaching, what you're preaching has a history that's rooted in your oppression. No desire to understand that. So don't get me started, because we
can do a whole series on that.
You better believe it. We're gonna come back.
Listen, next
week. Look what that is. Fact, the carpenter is just a regular dude with a direct relation with God, but people in power to know that is the ultimate threat to their system. Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
All right.
So as we listen, next week we'll have a chance to dive into a little bit more. We'll have some additional guests who will come on, some of our favorite people that we had last time for our Empowering Conversation series. So we'll be able to continue this. So if you have some additional questions surrounding the Black church that you want to engage, we'll definitely be able to talk about that next week, Pastor Mike, because I know, we'll have those guests will definitely have their own thoughts on the documentary as well. And so we'll be able to pick that up.
Can I set up the next section?
Oh, you want to do it this time?
I'm gonna throw it to you though.
Okay.
I gotta set it up.
You got it. Come on.
Listen, we're in the last few minutes of our Empowering Conversation tonight. So yes, make sure if you haven't watched the whole documentary, make sure you get the watch it. If you haven't, work part 1 and 2. Also pray that Pastor Heaven's smart TV gets a little smarter, so that he can.
It has a high IQ, okay?
Yeah. So that's PBS. You can go online. You can look at PBS's app. You can download the app.
Or you can YouTube.
But before we leave, right, I want to say this. During slavery, it was illegal to teach slaves, the enslaved people, to read.
Whew.
They understood that knowledge was power.
Yeah, say that again.
And that knowledge was power, and that knowledge was a gateway to freedom.
Oof.
It dishonors the ancestors to not take the opportunity to read seriously, right? It's that old running joke that is disgusting, but it's one. If you want to keep something from Black people, put it in the book. That's what many people said, right? And they still say that. That's why we need to read and always take the chance to read. And not just stuff just for casual leisure, but stuff that empowers us and strengthens us. That history that the documentary covered, guess what? It's in a book as well.
Yeah, plenty of books.
It's in a book as well. And we need to do it. So that's why every week we do Empowering Conversation Act. We end with reading. I grew up in New York, Pastor Heaven. You may not know this because I don't know if it was nationwide because we didn't know in that day. But there was a movement in commercials in New York called Riff. There was a commercial. And my old folk on this thing know what riff meant. Let me see. Anybody who can tell me right now, put in the chat what riff meant. If you old school New York, what did riff mean? I'm gonna wait. We're gonna wait. What did riff mean? I need some folk who gonna tell their ages real quick.
I'm like,
what did riff mean?
This is out.
In New York. Come on, let's hear. I'm waiting.
What this is.
What is riff? Reading is fundamental. Watch that, Pastor Heaven. There it is. There were commercials back in the day in New York when I was a kid that always talked about riff. Reading is fundamental. Reading is fundamental. And it was commercial. Kids gathered reading books. Reading is fundamental, right? You cannot just use your technology to have fun. Now, reading is fun. Learning is fun. Learning is empowering. Learning is transformative, right? So we like to end each segment.
That's a great, that's a very long way of saying.
Yeah. Listen, here it is. So here we go. Our last segment in the King's English is called, "What Are You Reading?" ? But in our empowering conversations, Pastor Heavy B closes out with, "What are you reading?" So Heavy B, take us into this last section by asking a question. And what is that question?
What you reading? I'm gonna keep my glasses on too.
What you? All right.
My goodness.
What you reading?
What I am reading. So this is going to be it's a reading. You know, as you were talking, Pastor Mike, I kept thinking back to a scene from one of my favorite shows, A Different World, where Dwayne had been got into an altercation with a gentleman who had put the N-word on his car, and they were in the jail cell together, and they were going back and forth. And he said something like, "I'm your worst nightmare. I'm an educated Black man. Your worst nightmare." And I remember hitting that, and I remember thinking, like, that is truly America's worst nightmare. It's not us empowering ourselves with weapons. One, because if you understand the system of war and the militarization of America, you'll understand that we can never outfight them with their. But our brain, our ability to, our ingenuity, our creativity, that is where our power lies.
That's right.
And so if we can truly kind of lean into that and understand that being an educated Black woman, an educated Black man, that makes you the biggest threat to the society. So don't feel like if you're reading and if you're not out there, marching. No, if you're reading these books, you're becoming a threat.
Empowering, liberating your mind. So what you reading?
So this is actually a book I had read when I was in seminary, when I was taking my women's theology class. So, and I thought it was important to talk about because we were talking about the Black church. And one of the things that I love to emphasize is the important role of Black women in the Black church. Right. So Righteous Discontent, the women's movement in the Black Baptist church in the 1880s to 1920s, written by Evelyn Brooks Higginbotham.
Put that up there close. So hold it up there for a second. Y'all screenshot that. Evelyn Brooks Higginbotham, Righteous Discontent.
And this book is really powerful because, this particular era was considered sort of the women's era. And so she really does this great job of highlighting the importance of sort of the Black Baptist, the Black Women's Convention within the Black Baptist Church, and sort of their role in creating the Black structure as a very powerful vehicle for political movements. And that it wasn't just Black men, but that these Black women were really undergirding and the ones leading the charge behind doing the work. And so if you're someone that really wants to learn more about the contributions of Black women, particularly within the Black Baptist Church, absolutely, this is what you want to be reading. And it also talks about, I had to read that book as well. Powerful. Yes, it's powerful. It's great. And she's I don't know if Evelyn is I don't know if she's like a historian.
She was in the documentary.
Oh, okay. So is she in the second part? Because I didn't see her.
She was in definitely the first part.
Okay, I must have missed her. I didn't finish that part. And the one I'm actually currently reading just recently came out, and it is long, y'all. Turn the spine. Turn to the spine. Barry. Listen, young Barry, Barack Obama's A Promised Land, and I have heard. I just started it, so I just finished the first chapter, and it's interesting. I have my critiques of Barack Obama. I think many of us intellectuals do. And so, it's always interesting to kind of,
I have no critiques of Barack Obama. We'll tell you that for another show. I have no critiques of Barack Obama. Real talk, but I'll carry that to another show.
But, it's just interesting because, Barack Obama has a very unique perspective. And sort of one of the things I remember as he was leaving his presidency, there was an article written by him, I'm forgetting his name, but he was sort of in the Atlantic talking about the honest hope that, like, one of the things that shocked him about Barack was that he genuinely has like a real sense of hope for where this country can go. And that's what really keeps him going. But you can also see that, in some of the conversations that he has, that he's, even in the first chapter, he talks about him wrestling with the hope that he has with coming to grips now, reflecting on the reality of what happened and what is happening. And so I think it's interesting to kind of see him kind of tug through that. My hope is to finish it so that I can get to, part 2 is coming out, y'all. And let me say, I'm gonna speak for Pastor Heavy right here, because somebody said, how about Michelle's book? I know Heavy B already read that book. Oh, first of all, let me just say this. We did a whole book club on it. So for those of you guys, there's so many women, we definitely had a great time. We had an entire conversation around. So yes, the minute becoming, I have the book, I have it on my on my Audible. So I listened to it and I read it, and I've often used it and reflected back on it because she drops so many gems in that book. And I think I'll say this, what I enjoyed so much about reading about her book was that you don't really know much about her story. And when you find out her relationship and her connection to the movement, particularly when it comes to being best friends with Reverend Jesse Jackson's daughter, it puts into context a little bit, it creates a bit of a tension when you try to understand sort of, the animosity that was tension that was, very visible throughout, when Barack Obama was running. And so her book was, I would say, probably more, I feel like I learned more because I'm not sort of reliving history. Most of us, got a chance to see Barack Obama's presidency. But nonetheless, it's, I'm looking forward to reading it so that I can get to part 2. All right. So here we go. These are not newer books, but these are ones I highly recommend. Aubrey Hendricks is a biblical scholar. Yes. This is not the book I'm showing tonight. But one of the books of his that are revolutionary for some is called The Politics of Jesus by Aubrey Hendricks. I've taught from that in the past at FCBC. But this one is called, you may know this one, The Universe Bends Towards Justice. Okay? It's entitled Radical Reflections on the Bible, the Church, and the Body Politic. He's looking at the church in particular through a particular biblical lens and looking at conservative movements, politics, even gospel music. Right. So it's a great book to reference, but it's called, The Universe Bends Towards Justice. And you can understand what he comes from is this kind of Black religious experience springboard into how you see scripture, how you understand the Bible, how you understand oneself as a believer. And so, yeah, Lisa, he teaches at Union, taught at NYTS for years, but a powerful brother. I know him well. His wife is an amazing scholar as well, Farrah Jasmine Griffin at Columbia, but he's powerful brother. So it's called, me put it close. The Universe Bends Towards Justice. All right. Somebody said bring a little closer. Okay. Here we go. Yes, I had a chance. Aubrey Hendricks. Yes, he's a great scholar. I've had a chance to be in, in the same space and to hear him speak. Yeah, just a phenomenal brother. So when he did the launch, just for quite fact, the launching of this book, the big launch that took place at FCBC. Oh wow! Panel some years ago. So good. Man, FCBC has such. I hope one day we can get someone in there to capture the rich history. The last 15 years, because there's so much that really needs to be documented and put together. And put somewhere, because it's powerful, rich history. No, FCBC is the bomb. Okay, so here it is. Here's the next one. It's another friend of mine, and many of us know Michael Eric Dyson. But this is a book, interesting book. It's called April 4th, 1968. Now, if you know what that date is, it is the day that MLK was assassinated. So it's called Martin Luther King Jr.'s death, and the day basically, and how it changed America. In light of the Black church, in light of the focus on civil rights, I want to kind of shape, one, a religious scholar talking about how the universe bends towards justice,
in this book, which actually it puts in a bigger perspective what the assassination of King that day meant in America in so many ways. I'll put that close to April 4th, 1968. It's not a new book, older book, but and how MLK's death changed America. So
I believe Walrond Dyson has a new. Did he have a new book that just came out?
He put one out every week, so it's possible. So, so he's a prolific writer. All right.
And listen, if you want to mention, his counterpart, which is Cornel West. So any book by Cornel West,
his mentor, his teacher,
his mentor. So I often forget because Black don't crack, so they all look like can't really tell what Cornel West looks like, but definitely any book by Cornel West, Michael Eric Dyson. Those folks are some great people to be reading from.
Listen, these two things, and I know I'm putting on Heavy B. I ain't gonna own this one. Okay, I'm gonna put this on Pastor Heavy B to create a graphic to make sure that we have our book suggestions somewhere. All right.
The media team create the graphic because
the media team,
skills. I can create a nice little basic graphic. We'll definitely reach out to the media team so what we'll do is after the last week, because last week we have some guests and I'm sure they're going to bring some books on. What we'll do is after that, we'll put all of the books, the suggested books together, and we'll have an opportunity for you guys to be able to purchase them if you'd like.
Next week, yes. And where we can also, and someone talked about looking for Black bookstores. That's a whole nother conversation. But yeah, definitely. Ricky he talking about some.
You're lit.
You lit. Ricky just don't know how we get down on Empowering Conversations. This is what we do.
I think this might be, I don't know if this is Ricky's first time, but
I don't know, but this is how we do it.
This is how we do.
We have fun. Because at the end of the day, you can be empowered, you can learn, you can grow, right? And have a good time and have fun at the same time. And so I like this FCBC book club. All these good ideas are coming up.
Well, so for you guys, I'm going to just put it out there. We actually do have a women's book club that is coming up next. And we will be engaging on a very provocative book. I'm going to put it out there. It's a little provocative, but it is something worth reading and it's something worth having a conversation about. So for my FCBC, for the women of FCBC, be on the lookout. That information will be coming out very soon. Mm-hmm. And so I'm excited to engage with you guys in a wonderful conversation around this book. I don't know if I want to drop it right now. I think I'm gonna wait so that you guys, but be on the lookout so that you guys can join us for our book club. And
I want to make an announcement that you'll probably see on social media. We're supposed to have a men's talk on Saturday at 1 p.m. We're pushing that to 4 p.m. But you'll see on social media the posts about our men's talk. It won't be 1 p.m. Saturday because we have a homegoing service on Saturday now. But that men's talk will be 4 p.m. on Saturday on all FCBC platform.
Awesome.
So yeah. So again, thank you for your ideas. Thank you for a lot of these recommendations, like opening dialogue to all those who are interested. Look, we're building this as we go, but I'm grateful, as always, thankful for all of you who joined us on tonight. And I thank you. I'm gonna let Heavy B close us out tonight.
Yeah, so thank you guys so much once again for joining us for episode 3. Our final episode is next week, so I know you guys do not want to miss it. We have some very special guests, and I'm going to let you know who they are right now so it can entice you. We have the Reverend Alicia Gordon, who will be returning. These are what we call our reoccurring guest commentators. Mm-hmm. So the Reverend Alicia Gordon will be joining us. The Reverend Dr. Willie Francois will be on with us as well. And then, oh my goodness, the name just please.
The Reverend Dr. Maurice Wallace.
I'm so sorry. I had it in my brain and it went away for like 5 seconds.
Yeah. So we'll have a great panel next week and a great conversation.
So if you have any questions, as always, make sure to send them to us via email as we engage in some really great conversation. We're going to try to do our best to summarize everything that we've talked about, have our guests chime in on all of these conversations around revolution, around Judas and the Black Messiah. We're going to do a great time summarizing all of this. It is going to be a fun time. And so I am looking forward to all of you guys joining us. So with that being said, peace and blessings to you all. And we will see you next week at Empowering Conversations That Act, Awaken the Conscious Today. God bless and good night.
Peace.